I sit alone in my cramped rented apartment in Detroit. The dim yellow light from the desk lamp spilling over a cluttered workspace covered with test-printed photos. I am Michael Bell, 31 years old, a freelance photographer, scraping by on wedding gigs, small events, and the occasional art series that no one ever buys. My life is simple to the point of being dull. Waking up late, a steaming cup of coffee on the table, then wandering the city with my battered old camera hanging around my neck. Today is no different. I'm flipping through the shots I took last week, rain-slicked streets, the weary faces of workers clocking out, a few portraits of kids playing in the park near my place. They remind me of myself as a child back when everything was simpler than it is now. I love this job even though it barely pays. It gives me freedom, no one to answer to, no tyrannical boss to bow before. But sometimes in quiet moments like this, my thoughts drift to family or what's left of it. My mother, Abigail Bell, passed away 2 months ago. Her death came suddenly, a heart attack in the middle of the night. I still haven't gotten over the pain. She was the only one in the house who truly understood me, quietly supporting my decision to pursue photography instead of jumping into my father's business machine. My father, Kevin Bell, owner of Bell Industrial Group, a chain of factories producing industrial components, is the complete opposite. He has always seen me as a failure, a drifter son with no thought for the future. And my younger brother, Mac, he's the perfect copy of Dad, ambitious, ruthless, always ready to step on others to climb higher. I'm rearranging a black and white photo of an old man sitting by a window, his gaze distant when the phone rings, shattering my focus. I glance at the screen. An unknown number, not in my contacts. Normally, I'd ignore calls like this, probably some ad or scam. But today, for some reason, I pick up. Maybe the apartment feels too quiet, or maybe I'm lonelier than usual. Hello? Is this Mr. Michael Bell? The voice on the other end is low, serious, like a middle-aged man trying to stay calm under pressure. Yes, that's me. Michael speaking. Who's this? I'm Martin Hargrove, your mother Abigail Bell's personal attorney. I'm calling about an important matter. My heart tightens. Mom's personal attorney? She never mentioned having one. She lived simply, saved every penny, worked as an accountant for Dad's company for decades. Why would she need a private lawyer? And why call me now 2 months after she's gone? My mother's personal attorney? What's this about? She's already passed away. I know, Michael. That's precisely why I'm calling. Mrs. Abigail left a will and I need you to come to my office for the official reading. That was her explicit request. I slump into the chair, gripping the phone tightly. Mom left a will? What could she possibly have to leave? The house belongs to Dad. The company is run entirely by him and Mac. She only had a few personal belongings and some modest savings accounts. I don't understand. Why me? What about my father and brother? Martin's voice grows firmer. The will is very clear. You must come alone. You are absolutely not to inform Mr. Kevin Bell or Mr. Mac Bell. This was Mrs. Abigail's strict instruction. If you violate it, the entire will becomes void, not tell Dad or Mac. Why would Mom do that? Our family was already cold, but she always tried to keep the peace, never wanting conflict. Now, even in her will, she's excluding them? Suspicion rises inside me, along with a vague unease. Something isn't right. What secret did Mom keep so deeply hidden? All right, I'll come. Where's your office? He gives me the address. An old building in downtown Detroit, not too far. Tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. And remember, come alone. The call ends, but my head is buzzing. I set the phone down and stare at the photos on the desk. Mom's image appears in my mind. Her gentle smile, eyes always full of worry. She left so suddenly, I never even got to say a proper goodbye. The funeral was quick. Dad handled everything while I just stood there like a stranger. Now this call. It makes me feel that everything is about to change. My quiet, boring life might be completely turned upside down. That afternoon, I throw on my old jacket, sling the camera over my shoulder out of habit, and drive my beat-up car out onto the street. Detroit in the chilly autumn afternoon is covered in falling golden leaves, but I'm in no mood to admire it. The whole way there, I keep asking myself, What did Mom want from me? Did she leave a few keepsakes or just a final message? But why all the secrecy? The suspicion grows stronger, making my heart pound. I imagine all sorts of things. Maybe Mom knew something about Dad, about the company? Or am I just paranoid? The lawyer's office building stands in the city center, a drab 1970s structure with a gray facade and dusty windows. I park in a nearby lot and walk into the lobby with a heavy heart. The receptionist checks my ID, then leads me up to the third floor in a creaking elevator. Martin's office is a small private conference room with a heavy wooden door and a stuffy atmosphere smelling of old paper and cold coffee. Martin is already waiting, a man around 50, silver hair, gray suit, gold-rimmed glasses. He shakes my hand, polite but cold. "Please have a seat, Michael. We'll begin right away." I sit in the stiff leather chair, hands gripping the edge of the table. The room is small, just a long wooden table, a few files and a voice recorder. Martin opens a sealed envelope and begins reading the will in a steady voice. My heart pounds harder when I hear the first words. "I, Abigail Bell, bequeath my entire secret investment portfolio, valued at approximately $15 million, to my eldest son, Michael Bell." $15 million. I'm stunned, as if struck lightning. My mouth falls open, but no words come out. Mom lived her whole life quietly, pinching pennies, enduring that cold house with Dad. She wore old clothes, cooked simple meals, never traveled or shopped extravagantly. How could she possibly have $15 million? That's an enormous sum, enough to change anyone's life. I shake my head, voice trembling. "No way. You've got the wrong person. My mom didn't have money. She was just an accountant." Martin looks at me calmly. "There's no mistake, Michael. Mrs. Abigail had been secretly investing for many years. This is a legally notarized will. The money is yours." I sit frozen, my mind in chaos. Why? Why did she hide it so completely? And why only me, not Dad or Mac? The initial unease has turned into a storm. There's definitely something more behind this, I'm sure of it. Martin slides a thick, carefully sealed folder toward me, stamped with red wax, along with a handwritten letter in Mom's familiar script. "What are these?" I ask, my voice breaking. "These are the additional items Mrs. Abigail left you. The letter is for you, and the folder, you'll understand when you open it. But remember, per the will, you must keep everything secret." My hands shake as I touch the letter and the folder. Goosebumps cover my skin. A chill runs down my spine. I don't yet know what's inside, but I have a strong premonition that from this moment on, my life will take a completely different turn. No longer just Michael Bell, the freelance photographer, but someone carrying an enormous secret that could change everything. I leave the office clutching the folder and letter, walking out onto the streets of Detroit like a sleepwalker. The cold autumn wind bites, but I feel nothing. Only anticipation and tension rising. What is Mom's secret, and what am I going to do with it? I walk toward my beat-up car in the parking lot, clutching the thick folder as if it might vanish into thin air. My mind was a whirlwind, thoughts spinning endlessly. $15 million? My mother, the woman I'd always believed lived in near poverty simplicity, had secretly built an enormous investment portfolio? And why leave it all to me alone, cutting out my father and brother entirely? I opened the car door, tossed the folder and letter onto the passenger seat, then slid behind the wheel. Detroit's streets slid past the windows, gray high-rises, avenues littered with golden falling leaves, crowds hurrying home after work. To me, everything blurred into a hazy mess. I drove like an automaton, mechanically dodging traffic, while my brain churned between the staggering sum of money and the mysterious folder beside me. My rented apartment sat on the outskirts, an aging complex with peeling paint and an elevator that broke down more often than it worked. The place was cramped, a cluttered desk buried under photographs, an unmade bed, a tiny kitchen with a few unwashed bowls in the sink. I collapsed onto the sagging sofa and placed the letter on the coffee table. Mom's familiar handwriting on the envelope, those soft, slightly trembling curves made my chest tighten. She always wrote by hand. She said handwriting carried a person's soul. I took a deep breath, tore open the envelope, and unfolded the pages. In the letter, Mom poured out her deep love for me. She wrote that she had always been proud of me, even though my life wasn't the glittering success my father and brother wanted. You are the one who lives with heart, Michael. Honest, without hunger for power or status. You don't belong in the cold world your father and Mac have thrown themselves into. I saw it when you were little, when you chose art over business, when you wandered the city with your camera instead of sitting behind a desk. I love you for exactly who you are. Did she really understand me that well? She had never said it aloud, but now through these words I felt it clearly. She went on, "The money I'm leaving you isn't for you to live lavishly or waste. I want you to be free, free from depending on this family, free to live the life you've always dreamed of. You can open your own photography studio, travel the world taking pictures of places you love, or simply live without ever worrying about bills again. That is my gift to you, because I know you deserve it." My heart warmed for a moment, but the next lines turned me ice cold. "There is something else I'm leaving you inside that folder. It contains all the evidence of your father Kevin Bell's and your brother Mac Bell's criminal activities." I froze. The letter slipped from my fingers. Criminal activities? My father, Kevin Bell, 66 years old, chairman of Bell Industrial Group, the chain of industrial parts factories he built from nothing. He was patriarchal, authoritarian, ruthlessly pragmatic. To him, the company was everything. Profit was everything. He had taught us since childhood that the world is a war and the weak get crushed. And Mac, my 28-year-old brother, currently production line supervisor at Dad's main plant. Impulsive, competitive, status-obsessed. Always ready to do whatever Dad ordered to climb higher. But criminal? I had never even considered it. The company was constantly praised in the local press, Detroit's pride and joy. Mom confessed that during her many years as the company's accountant, she had quietly collected the evidence. I saw everything, Michael. Shady transfers, fake contracts, shell companies for money laundering. I didn't want to believe it, but the truth was right in front of me. I copied everything, kept it safe, because I knew one day it might save someone. Why didn't she ever say anything? Tears rolled down my cheeks as I read. "I didn't expose it while I was alive because I didn't want our family torn apart. I didn't want you and Mac to become enemies, to look at each other with hatred. And I was afraid, Michael. Afraid of consequences beyond my control. Prison, bankruptcy, or worse, violence from those involved. I chose silence to protect everyone." Now that she was gone, she was handing the decision to me. "The choice is yours, Michael. Turn the evidence over to the authorities or bury it forever. I trust you to do what is right. I will love you always, Mom." I folded the letter, my heart aching. How had she lived all those years, carrying this colossal secret alone, working beside my father every day, knowing exactly what he was doing? I looked at the still sealed folder. My hands shook as I broke the red wax and opened it. Inside were dozens of documents. Bank statements from Switzerland, fictitious contracts with phantom partners, lists of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands, doctored tax reports with millions of dollars manipulated, forged supplier signatures. Everything was meticulously organized, annotated in Mom's handwriting. Dates, details, even USB drives with audio recordings attached. I sat paralyzed, flipping through page after page as if electrocuted. It was systematic, organized, spanning more than a decade. Not small mistakes, but a sophisticated financial crime network. My father and brother had evaded taxes, laundered money, defrauded partners. The scale was so massive that if exposed, the entire Bell industrial empire would collapse. But what shocked me most wasn't the extent of the crimes. It was that Mom had lived in silence for years, secretly preserving the truth. She knew everything and chose to suffer alone. Old memories suddenly flashed back, painfully sharp. Mom sitting alone late at night in her study under the dim yellow desk lamp, eyes red from exhaustion. I used to think she was just working late to help Dad. Now I understood. She was copying evidence, documenting things she could never speak of. The times Dad berated her in front of the whole family over missing money, shouting that she was useless even though I knew it wasn't her fault. She would bow her head, stay silent, wipe tears when no one was looking. The times she was excluded from every business decision when Dad and Mac held their closed-door meetings, treating her like an outsider, and she never fought back. She swallowed it all for the sake of the family. I realized she had spent nearly her entire life enduring in order to protect a family she knew was rotting from the inside. She loved Dad, loved us, enough to live in a private hell. My tears fell onto one of her handwritten notes, blurring the ink. I cried not from anger, but from overwhelming pity. Pity for how lonely she had been, how much she had sacrificed. I felt no joy over the money or the power to destroy everything. $15 million now felt like a burden, not a gift. This secret could send my father and brother to prison, ruin everything. All I felt was crushing weight and suffocating sorrow. Before me lay justice, clear, irrefutable evidence. Behind me remained blood ties. My father, for all his tyranny, was still the man who gave me life. Mac, for all his ambition, was still my little brother. How could I betray them? I closed the folder, locked it in my desk drawer, then collapsed onto the bed and stared at the dark ceiling. That night I barely slept, thoughts raging like a storm. I pictured Dad in handcuffs, Mac begging and crying. In the exhausted haze between wakefulness and sleep, Mom's face appeared, smiling sadly, silently asking, "What will you choose, son? Justice or family?" I tossed and turned in torment, soaked in sweat. Dawn crept through the window and I made a temporary decision. I would not turn over the evidence, not yet. I still couldn't sever the bonds of father and son, of brothers, even though the first irreparable cracks had already formed inside me. For now, the secret would stay with me. But I knew it would never let me rest. The tension, the drama had only just begun. In the days that followed, I tried desperately to slip back into my old routine, pretending nothing had happened. Wake up, brew a thick black coffee, grab the camera and wander Detroit's streets, shooting rain-soaked pavements, the exhausted faces of working people, or the hidden corners of the city that only I found beautiful. Freelance photography went on as usual. A few small gigs, editing photos until the early hours, sending invoices by email. I tried to live as if I'd never received that call from Martin Hargrove, as if the folder full of criminal evidence was nothing more than a bad dream. But every night when I lay in bed, the secret rose up again and gnawed at me. I kept it locked tight in the drawer, yet inside my head it ticked like a time bomb, counting down, slow and relentless. I kept wondering, do Dad and Mac know anything? Or did Mom hide it too well? Every time the phone rang, I jumped, terrified someone had found out. My ordinary life had become a thin shell, and I was constantly holding back the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something enormous that could explode at any moment. Then, out of nowhere, an unexpected invitation arrived in the mail, thick creamy cardstock with gold lettering, inviting me to my father Kevin Bell's retirement gala. After decades at the helm of Bell Industrial Group, he was officially stepping down. The event would be a grand celebration, a farewell, and the public announcement of how power and assets would be divided. I didn't want to go. The distance between my father and me had grown too wide. He had never considered me part of the empire he built. Our rare phone calls were nothing but cold questions about my work, always ending with the same disappointed tone. Why don't you ever think about your future? And Mac would definitely be there, strutting around as usual. But after a sleepless night, I decided to attend. I wanted to see with my own eyes exactly where I stood in my father's heart. Deep down, maybe I still hoped for some small acknowledgement, or at least to face reality one last time. The gala was held on a Saturday night at the Grand Plaza, Detroit's grandest downtown hotel, an old Gothic-style building with glittering crystal chandeliers and long red carpets. I drove there wearing the only suit I owned, an old one I'd bought years ago for a wedding. On the way, my heart pounded harder, excitement mixed with dread. I imagined Dad giving his speech, Mac grinning triumphantly, and me standing in some dark corner. When I pulled into the parking garage, I saw rows of luxury cars. Mercedes, BMWs, even a few Lamborghinis belonging to businessmen, partners, and the press. Bright lights spilled from the main entrance. Soft jazz drifted through the air. I felt completely out of place among the bespoke suits, glittering evening gowns and power handshakes accompanied by fake smiles. The air was thick with expensive perfume and fine wine. I took a glass of champagne from a passing tray, sipped it to steady myself, but my hand still trembled slightly. Curious, judgmental eyes turned toward me. I caught whispers spreading like ripples. "Isn't that Mr. Bell's older son? The photographer guy. They say he never amounted to anything." The murmurs stung like needles. A few smirks appeared, mixed with condescending glances reserved for the camera guy among the elite. My face burned as if I were being stripped naked in front of everyone. Why had I come? To torture myself? I tried to avoid people's eyes, weaving through the crowd toward a quieter corner. Then suddenly I ran straight into Mac Bell. My younger brother stood there, tall and sleek in a glossy black suit, hair perfectly styled, a smug smile on his lips. He looked at me like I was a beggar who'd wandered into the wrong party. "Well, well, the prodigal brother finally shows up," Mac said in that shrill, mocking tone. "Didn't think you'd have the guts. How's the photography business? Still broke and wandering the streets? This place isn't for people like you, Michael. You don't belong here." His words cut like knives, but I refused to respond. I didn't want to turn the evening into an open confrontation. I just gave him a cold nod and walked away, heart hammering with suppressed rage. Max snickered behind my back, and I heard his friends laughing along. I slipped away from the crowd, found a distant corner, and watched everything like an outsider. From there I could see the extravagance. Tables laden with fresh seafood, French wines, enormous floral arrangements. It all made me feel sick. The formal ceremony began. The microphone crackled and my father, Kevin Bell, stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. At 66, he still looked commanding, silver-streaked hair, booming, authoritative voice. He delivered a long, self-congratulatory speech about his journey, from a poor factory worker to building Bell Industrial into Detroit's leading industrial parts empire. "I've sweated blood and tears to reach this day," he declared proudly. "Years of building the company, surviving crises, crushing countless competitors. This company is my legacy." The crowd applauded, and I stood there feeling like he was talking about someone else's life, not mine. Legacy? To me, his legacy was nothing but coldness and favoritism. Finally, he announced his official retirement and the transfer of full control of Bell Industrial Group, along with the entire family fortune, to his youngest son, Mac Bell. My heart clenched, though I had expected it. Mac strutted onto the stage, bowing repeatedly, shaking hands with partners, basking in endless congratulations and applause. He looked like a star, camera flashes popping around him. The atmosphere was at its peak of celebration. Glasses were raised, laughter rang out. I stood in my corner, gripping my glass so hard it hurt, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. That was it. I had no part in any of it, as always. But just when I thought the evening was winding down, my father spoke again, this time about his eldest son. His voice was ice cold, without hesitation. "As for Michael, my so-called firstborn, he is not my biological son. There is no blood relation between us. Therefore, he will receive nothing. No share of my personal assets or the company." I froze in the middle of the ballroom, every sound suddenly muffled and distant. The applause died instantly, replaced by a wave of whispers. My feet felt nailed to the floor, blood rushed to my face. Not his biological son. What was he saying? I was born into this family, raised under that roof. No matter how much he despised me, he couldn't use the very bond of blood as an excuse to disown me publicly like this. It was deliberate, cruel humiliation. I could barely breathe. I looked up at the stage. My father stood there, expressionless, as if he were announcing a business decision, not denying his own son. Max smirked from the stage and added through the microphone, voice dripping with mockery. Even if he did share our blood, someone who only knows how to hold a camera wouldn't be fit to run the company anyway. Right, everyone? Mac's friends burst out laughing. The sound spread, others joined in, and the entire ballroom turned into an arena where I was the defeated gladiator. I stood surrounded by mocking stares, burning with shame and humiliation, throat tight. I wanted to shout, to scream that he was lying, that I was his son, but the weight of the crowd crushed me. Everyone looked at me like I was a stranger, a joke. Tears threatened, but I held them back. I would not cry here. In the end, I chose silence. I turned and walked out of the hall in a daze. I left the hotel, leaving behind the dazzling lights, the echoing laughter, and a family that had just publicly disowned me before the entire world. The cold night wind whipped around me, but I felt nothing except the stabbing pain in my chest. Only on the drive home did the tears finally fall. Mom's secret now felt like a double-edged sword. I could use it for revenge, but would it be worth it? The tension, the drama had reached its peak, and I knew the real storm was only just beginning. Leaving the gala, I drove through the empty streets of Detroit, pale orange streetlights stretching distorted shadows across the rain-wet asphalt. My old car shuddered with every gear change, but every sound was drowned out by one sentence echoing over and over in my head, cold and merciless as a blade. He is not my biological son. There is no blood tie, and Mac's sneering laugh, followed by the chorus of his friends' laughter, stabbed into my heart again and again. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white, tears blurring the road until I had to pull over to the curb and wipe my face. How could Dad do this? Publicly disown me in front of hundreds of people, businessmen, partners, the press, as if I were a stain that needed to be erased. I felt small, invisible, as if I had never truly existed in that family. Instead of heading straight back to my apartment, I decided not to go home yet. I needed air, needed the biting cold to cool the fire burning inside me. I turned the car away from downtown and drove toward the Detroit River, where the night wind carried the damp smell of water and the soft lapping of waves. I parked in an empty lot by the riverbank and stepped out. The late autumn wind blew hard, icy enough to cut through bone, slapping my face like punishment. I leaned against the rusted iron railing and stared out at the black water glinting under a crescent moon. Detroit at night was strangely quiet, only the distant rumble of trucks and the mournful horn of a ship from the port. I breathed deeply, trying to push away the images from the party, the blinding lights, the fake smiles, my father's icy declaration. The harder I tried to forget, the sharper they became. Not my biological son. Those words were a time bomb detonating slowly inside my skull. Was Dad lying? Or was there a secret I had never known? I had lived 31 years under that roof carrying the Bell name, and now he denied everything. I needed answers. I couldn't let it hang like this. After a long internal struggle, I made up my mind. I would go to the house right now and confront him. No waiting until morning, no letting the rage cool. I needed to face him no matter the outcome. I got back in the car, started the engine, and drove to the old family home in the suburbs, the place where I grew up yet now felt utterly foreign. The route was so familiar I drove on autopilot past quiet streets lined with trees shedding golden leaves. My heart pounded, tension rising. The house appeared ahead, a 2-story vintage mansion with a wide front lawn and a garage full of luxury cars. The living room lights were still on. They weren't asleep yet. I parked at the gate, took a deep breath, and walked in. The door was unlocked, as always. Dad was always arrogantly certain no one would dare touch his house. I pushed the door open. The dry creak of the hinges echoed through the silent space. The living room was vast and cold, expensive leather sofas bathed in dim yellow light, the fireplace still glowing with red embers. My father, Kevin Bell, sat reclined in his usual armchair, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring out the window as if avoiding something. Despite the obvious exhaustion etched on his face, he still radiated that rigid, unyielding authority. Mac was standing by the built-in bar, pouring himself a drink, when the sound of the door made him freeze. He whipped around. For a split second, his eyes widened. Then the familiar contempt instantly returned. "What the hell are you doing back here?" His voice was high and sharp with mockery. "Wasn't the party humiliating enough for you?" I ignored him and looked straight at Dad. "Dad, we need to talk. Right now." Dad lifted his head, his cold gaze sweeping over me like I was a stranger. "What is there to talk about? I already made everything perfectly clear in front of everyone. You're not my son. Get out of my house and don't annoy me any further." His words cut like a knife, but I refused to back down. I stepped closer, voice trembling with rage and pain. "Not your biological son? What are you talking about? I was born in this house, raised by you and Mom. What proof do you have to disown me in front of the whole world? Or is it just because I'm not like Mac, because I didn't follow the path you wanted, so you throw me away?" Dad gave a scornful laugh and slammed his glass down on the table. "Proof? You want proof? Mac, show him." Mac smirked, walked to the filing cabinet in the corner, pulled out a white envelope and tossed it at me like trash. "Here you go, big brother. Take a look and shut up." My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a single printed sheet, a DNA test report from a reputable lab in Detroit. The heading was unmistakable. Paternity test results between Kevin Bell and Michael Bell. I scanned down to the conclusion, my heart thundered. Probability of paternity, 0%. No biological relationship. I stood frozen. The paper slipped from my fingers. Shock surged through my body like an electric current. It couldn't be. Was this fake or real? I shook my head, voice breaking. What is this? When did you do the test? Why?" Dad rose slowly, his tone calm and calculated, as if announcing a long-decided business verdict. He said he had suspected for years that there had never been what he called the bond of blood between us. 6 months ago, Mac had secretly arranged the test using a sample taken the last time I visited the house. The results went straight to him, clear, conclusive. I was not his biological son. He spoke of Mom in a dry, icy voice, claiming she had betrayed him with someone he no longer cared to identify. She was dead, and to him the truth behind it no longer mattered. What he needed was a final legal reason to sever every tie between us. His words hit me like hammer blows. Mom betrayed him? No, Mom wasn't that kind of person. She had endured a lifetime beside him, sacrificed everything. But this report, it was black and white, stamped and signed by a doctor. I collapsed into a chair, mind reeling. The shock squeezed my chest until I could barely breathe. So this was the basis on which he publicly disowned me and stripped me of any inheritance. He continued, "I will not let my fortune fall into the hands of someone who doesn't share my blood. Mac is my real son. He deserves everything. As for you, get out and never come back." Mac cut in, voice dripping with triumph. "See, brother? You never belonged here. You never did. Go back to taking pictures on the street. That's where you belong." I looked at them, two people I had once called family, now total strangers. Tears fell again, not from sadness this time, but from fury and shock. This DNA report, it changed everything. I wasn't his biological son. Then who was I? What had Mom hidden from me? I picked up the paper, stuffed it into my pocket, and stood. "Fine. If that's what you want, I'll go. But you and your son will regret what you've done tonight." Dad waved me off and turned his back. "Just leave. Don't bother me again." I walked out of the house into the dark night, the cold wind whipping my face. On the drive back to my apartment, my head spun around that DNA report. The shock was still raw, but a new resolve was forming. Mom's secret now mattered more than ever. I had to uncover the truth for myself. My apartment greeted me with suffocating silence, and I knew this night would be endless. I stumbled back into my cramped apartment late that night, slamming the door behind me. The lock clicked loudly in the narrow space. Faint orange streetlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting pale, sickly stripes across the dusty floor. I collapsed onto the old sofa, then immediately stood up again. I couldn't sit still. Kevin's icy words still rang in my ears, "You're not my son," along with Mac's mocking laughter and the DNA report that felt like a death sentence. 6 months ago, they had already known, had already planned to cut me out of everything, and tonight's gala had merely been the cruel public execution. I felt betrayed twice over, once by my father and again by my very origins. My hands shook as I tore off the suit jacket and flung it to the floor. I sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by humiliation and a hollow emptiness that choked me. It was as if everything I had tried to bury for years had been dragged back into the light without mercy, pulling me into a deeper abyss than ever before. Tears fell again, but this time not from pain, from pure rage. Rage at my father, at Mac, and even at Mom for perhaps knowing and never telling me. In the chaos of memories, my childhood rose up like a parade of injustices. Kevin had always poured every favor and resource onto Mac. The old suburban house appeared vividly in my mind. The peeling white walls, the cracked leather sofa in the living room, the garage stuffed with industrial parts Dad brought home from the factory. Kevin Bell, around 40 then, tall and loud-voiced, was always consumed by the company. He had built Bell Industrial from nothing and treated it as his life's mission. But with us, his 2 sons, the favoritism was blatant. Mac was born looking like him. Sharp eyes, confident smile, competitive from the cradle. Me? I liked sitting in a corner drawing or using the old film camera Grandma had given me to photograph random things around the house. Dad looked at me like I was an alien, and the unfairness started with the smallest things. I remembered the times my school achievements barely earned a glance. In 4th grade, I brought home a report card full of A's, with a teacher's note praising my creativity. Excited, I placed it on the dinner table and waited. Dad glanced at it, nodded curtly. "Not bad, but focus on math and science. The rest doesn't matter." Then turned to 6-year-old Mac and praised his scribbled drawing of a truck. "That's my boy. That's Daddy's truck, isn't it? Such a good son." I sat at the end of the table, clutching my report card, feeling invisible. It was always the same afterward. My first school photography award was dismissed with, "What good is taking pictures?" while Mac's high math score earned a backyard barbecue with friends and relatives. Every tiny success of Mac's was celebrated like a national holiday. Mine were met with indifference. Back then, I told myself I just hadn't tried hard enough, but now I knew. It was deep, unchangeable favoritism. At 18, when I decided to study photography at community college and needed $300 for film and supplies, I went to Dad's office at the factory, voice trembling. "Dad, I need money for school materials. I'll pay you back when I get a job." He didn't even look up from his ledgers. "Money for photography? You think I print cash? Study business, that's the future." He refused without a second thought. Meanwhile, Mac got tuition at a prestigious university, a brand new car upon graduation, and a high-paying job at the factory handed to him on a silver platter. Money, connections, opportunities. Everything flowed to Mac like a river. I worked nights at a fast food joint, saved every penny for a second-hand camera, and the wound of that unfairness never healed. Amid those bitter memories, the only image that softened my heart was Mom. Abigail Bell, hair neatly pinned, gentle smile, always my quiet refuge. I remembered evenings when she sat silently watching me sort prints in the living room under the warm desk lamp. She would sit beside me, hold my black and white photos, even if she didn't fully understand the technique or artistic meaning, and nod. "They're beautiful, son. I can see people in these pictures. Keep living the way you believe is right." Those words were cool water on the burns left by Dad. She would sit for hours listening to my ideas about photography, even though her eyes were tired after a long day as the company accountant. I remembered the time she secretly slipped me her savings to buy equipment, hiding it from Dad like a guilty secret just to protect her son's small dream. Once she called me into the kitchen and pressed $100 into my hand. I saved it from the grocery money. "Don't tell your father. Use it for film." I believe in you." I hugged her, feeling the warmth from her thin body, knowing she was sacrificing part of her already simple life. She always did that, supported me in the shadows like an ally in hiding. But I also realized that no matter how much she loved and shielded me, she never dared stand up to Dad directly. And her love, however deep, could not fill the cold void left by a father's rejection. She was afraid the family would break apart, afraid of conflict. Whenever Dad yelled at me, she would only pull me out of the room and whisper, "Your father has a short temper, don't take it to heart." Never once did she say, "Kevin, don't shout at the boy." She was a prisoner of her own endurance, and unwittingly I was dragged into that prison too. Her love was profound but not strong enough to tear down the wall Dad had built. When I finally chose photography over joining the company, Kevin's contempt became open scorn. He publicly called my path useless and shameful. "You want to be a photographer? That's a job for lazy bums," he shouted at that fateful family dinner in front of Mac and Mom. From then on, the distance in the family was no longer mere silence. It became an impenetrable wall. Dad rarely called. Mac started mocking me too, and Mom could only send handwritten letters of comfort. The family crumbled day by day. Everything that happened at tonight's gala was merely the cruelest replay of what I had endured my whole life. Dad's public disownment, Mac's ridicule, the DNA report as the final period. I understood now. The moment he denied my blood, in his eyes I had ceased to be a real son. He had chosen Mac long ago, and now he used the truth to justify it. Every last hesitation, every lingering attachment inside me collapsed along with those memories. I stood up, opened the drawer, pulled out Mom's sealed folder of secrets and placed it on the table like a verdict that could no longer be postponed. The lamp shone down on the pages, blatant evidence of crime, shady transfers, fake contracts. After a long silence in the dark apartment, I made my final decision. I would turn over every piece of evidence against Kevin Bell and Mac Bell to the police. Not for revenge, but to end a chain of crimes that had been hidden for years beneath the polished facade of a respectable family. Mom's secret had become a weapon, and I would use it to seek justice, for her and for myself. That night stretched on forever, but my resolve was clear. The storm was coming. As the first rays of sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, I got up, brewed a thick black coffee, but couldn't swallow a single sip. My hands trembled as I gathered Mom's folder and her handwritten letter into an old briefcase. This was it. No more delaying. I drove to the Detroit Police Headquarters, that grim gray building downtown, surrounded by patrol cars and the tense atmosphere you only see in movies. My heart pounded as I walked into the lobby. The smell of stale coffee and old paper hit me hard. I asked to speak to a detective, my voice cracking. "I have evidence of financial crimes. It involves Bell Industrial Group." They led me to a small interrogation room. Cold concrete walls, a scarred wooden table. A middle-aged detective named Ramirez sat across from me, eyes sharp but voice calm. "Tell me the whole story, Mr. Bell." I told him everything. Mom's will, the folder, the evidence of tax evasion, money laundering, fake contracts. I slid the documents across the table along with Mom's letter as final proof. Ramirez flipped through the pages, his eyes widened as the scale sank in. "This is serious. Are you absolutely sure you want to turn this in? It's your family." I nodded, voice steady even though my heart ached. That family doesn't include me anymore. That very morning, I handed over the entire secret dossier and Mom's letter to the Detroit Police Department. My signature shook on the receipt form, a crooked scrawl that felt like the final full stop on everything I once knew as family. The case was immediately classified as major financial crime. They photocopied everything, sealed the originals, and forwarded the file to the Economic Crimes Unit and the prosecutor's office. Ramirez put a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing. But brace yourself, this is going to be huge." I left the station feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. On the drive home, I pictured Dad and Mac being summoned. Frantic phone calls, panicked faces. And it happened. Within hours, Kevin Bell and Mac Bell were urgently called in for questioning. Ramirez confirmed it later. Both had been brought in. That same evening, exhausted after a day of churning thoughts, I had just gotten back to my apartment when heavy, frantic knocking shook the door. My stomach tightened. Who could it be at this hour? I opened it. Kevin and Max stood there, faces twisted with rage and panic. Dad, usually impeccable in his suits, now wore a wrinkled shirt, eyes bloodshot. Max stood behind him, fists clenched, face pale. They barged in without waiting for an invitation and slammed the door shut. "What the hell have you done, you bastard?" Dad roared, his voice echoing through the tiny room, making the walls seem to shake. He unleashed a torrent of the vilest insults. Traitor, ingrate, destroyer of the family legacy. He jabbed a finger in my face. "I raised you, fed you, paid for your education, even though you never amounted to anything. And now you stab me in the back and hand evidence to the police? You ungrateful, treacherous piece of trash. You're destroying everything I built." His words cut deep, but I stood motionless. Mac jumped in, accusing me of jealousy, of envying the rightful heir, of being a pathetic loser who took revenge the coward's way. He stepped right up to me, face red. "You're jealous of me, aren't you? Because I'm the heir, because I have everything. You've got nothing. Just drifting around with that stupid camera. So you do this. Coward. Who the hell do you think you are? Some bastard with no blood tie demanding justice?" Dad cursed me with the heaviest words a father can use, declaring I had buried the entire Bell family alive. He paced the room, voice shrill. "You're burying me, burying Mac, burying the whole Bell legacy. I curse you, Michael. You will regret this." Their venom soaked into me like poison, but I stood silent before their fury, neither defending myself nor arguing, simply staring at them as if they were strangers. They were no longer father and brother, just two men desperately trying to save an empire built on lies. I looked at Dad and remembered childhood moments, but now they were only ashes. Mac tried to shove me. Dad pulled him back. "Let's go, son." "He's not worth it." They left with final threats. "You'll pay for this. We'll sue you," leaving the apartment steeped in suffocating silence. I collapsed onto the bed, mind blank. The slammed door still echoed. I knew this was the last time they would ever cross my threshold. But the tension kept rising. What would happen next? In the days that followed, leaks began to surface. I woke to calls from unknown numbers, reporters, old acquaintances, all asking about the case. The press jumped in. Stories exploded across local papers and social media. Bell industrial empire crumbles. Disowned son exposes father and brother's crimes. Millions in tax evasion. Secrets from Abigail Bell's will. Shareholders panicked and dumped stock. The company's value plummeted. Partners suspended cooperation, canceled orders. Clients terminated contracts en masse and demanded compensation. Factory workers quit in droves. Production lines ground to a halt. The once bustling plants now stood silent like graveyards. I pictured Dad in his office, phones ringing with disaster after disaster, and Mac running around trying to put out fires. The manufacturing empire Kevin Bell had been so proud of teetered on the brink of bankruptcy. Media swarmed the headquarters, cameras flashing. I avoided everyone, turned off my phone, and stayed holed up in my apartment. Then the real storm hit. After independent experts verified every piece of evidence, arrest warrants were issued. Kevin Bell and Mac Bell were taken into custody at company headquarters in full view of employees and the press. I heard it on the radio. Kevin Bell, 66, and his son Mac Bell, 28, led away in handcuffs before a stunned crowd. A scene that has shocked Detroit. I could picture it. Dad, once so commanding, now bowing his head in steel cuffs. Mac sobbing and pleading. My heart ached, but I knew this was the inevitable consequence. The trial lasted weeks. Endless interrogations, cross-examinations, and financial audits by independent agencies. I was called as a witness, standing in a packed courtroom under blinding lights and probing stares. Dad's defense lawyer twisted the knife. "You did this out of family resentment, didn't you?" I answered calmly. "I didn't do it out of hatred. I did it for justice. I didn't want these crimes buried forever." The confrontations were brutal. Dad and Max sat in the dock, gaunt and hollow-eyed, staring at me with pure hatred. Forensic accountants laid out the evidence. Millions in evaded taxes, offshore accounts, forged signatures. Undeniable. Finally, faced with irrefutable proof, Kevin Bell was sentenced to 18 years in prison for large-scale tax evasion, money laundering, and falsifying financial records. Mac Bell received 9 years as an accomplice for concealing crimes and signing fraudulent contracts. The gavel fell. Scattered applause rose in the courtroom. Justice had prevailed. All assets tied to the crimes were frozen and placed under independent investigation. Factories, bank accounts, real estate, everything sealed. The Bell empire collapsed completely. In newspapers and on the evening news, I was portrayed as the son who courageously exposed his own family to reveal the dark underbelly of a corporate giant, a choice the public both admired and found heartbreaking. Headlines called me the reluctant hero, Michael Bell and the Bell industrial scandal. But all I felt was a cold, heavy emptiness, as if I had personally severed the last thread connecting me to a family. I sat alone, staring out the window, tears rolling down my cheeks. Dad and Mac were now prisoners. The company was gone. I had done the right thing, yet why did it hurt so much? Amid the public spotlight, I knew I was no hero. I was simply the one forced to speak the truth that Mom had carried alone her entire life. She had stayed silent to protect. I spoke to set it free, but the price was crushing. The suspense and drama have now given way to a deep, quiet sorrow. What will my life be from now on? After the trial finally ended, with the judge's gavel still echoing in my mind, I returned to my own life. The media frenzy died down. The tense courtroom confrontations were over. The court had spoken and the world seemed to forget about me. I went back to my cramped rented apartment on the outskirts of Detroit, locked the door, turned off my phone, and just tried to breathe. Life had become a vast silence, but not a peaceful one. It felt like the hollow void left after a storm where everything has been swept away and only debris remains. I handled the money Mom had left me, those secret $15 million, with extreme care. No extravagance, no luxury. I opened a small photography studio in a quiet neighborhood, about a 30-minute drive from downtown. It was a simple rented space with white walls, shelves full of photography books, and a corner for editing with my old computer. Most of the remaining money I invested conservatively in long-term, low-risk options, high-interest savings accounts, stable blue-chip stocks, and a few modest pieces of suburban real estate. No gambling, no ambition. I only wanted enough to live comfortably and to pursue my passion without ever worrying about the next bill. Work started slowly. Weddings, local events, personal art series for small exhibitions. Clients gradually came, drawn to the raw, emotional honesty of my photos. Tired workers' faces, rain-soaked Detroit streets, children grinning wide. The studio was no empire, but it was mine. And for the first time in my life, I felt I truly belonged somewhere. A year later, the business had stabilized. Income became steady, not wealthy, but enough for me to buy a small house on the outskirts of Detroit. A simple place with a green backyard and a garage big enough for my old car. I painted the walls myself, arranged the furniture, a desk by the window overlooking trees, shelves filled with old prints, and a tiny kitchen corner where I brew coffee every morning. Nothing lavish, nothing flashy, just a home that was truly mine. A place where I could wake up without the weight of rent or the ghosts of the past. I moved out of the apartment, taking only my camera and my memories of Mom. The house became my sanctuary, a refuge where I could shut out the outside world. Life flowed quietly, no parties, no extravagance. Mornings. I woke early, camera in hand, wandering the suburbs, shooting misty sunrises or friendly neighbors' faces. Afternoons, editing in the studio, sending files to clients. Late nights, sitting alone with a cup of hot tea, looking through old photos, especially the ones of Mom under the warm desk lamp light. Her gentle smile. Weekends were rare, quiet days, reading, tidying the house, or simply lying on the sofa listening to soft jazz. No close friends, no romantic relationships. I chose solitude as a way to heal. Detroit remained the same. Noisy streets, smoky factories, but to me it had become a place to start over. Still, deep inside, the guilt never fully disappeared. It lingered like an old scar that aches from time to time. I thought about Dad and Mac in prison, facing cold walls for years. Had I been too cruel? Was justice worth this price? Many times I wrote letters to the prison asking about their health, trying to ease the guilt of having put them there myself. Simple notes. Dad, how are you? I'm worried about your health. Mac, how are you holding up? I hope you're okay. I sent them with a faint hope, some reply, some sign that blood still mattered. But every letter was returned unopened, marked recipient refuses delivery. Not a single response. Kevin and Mac had chosen to sever all contact with me. Each returned envelope felt like another stab in the heart. To them, I was the enemy, the traitor. After many silent attempts and only emptiness in return, I finally stopped. I accepted that there was nothing left to hold on to. From that point on, I officially cut all ties with the Bell family. No more letters, no visits, no thoughts of them. My life was now entirely my own. Lonely but free. 2 years later, on what seemed like an ordinary autumn afternoon, I was sitting in the studio editing a portrait series. Golden sunlight streamed through the window, soft music playing from the small speaker. Life had found its rhythm. The studio was busier. The little house felt warm and safe, and the old pain had slowly faded. I thought I had moved on, learned to live without the past. Then my phone rang. An unknown number. Out of habit, I answered. A tense female voice from the hospital, professional but anxious. Hello, is this Michael Bell? This is Detroit Central Hospital. We're calling regarding Mr. Kevin Bell. My heart stopped. Dad? After 2 years of silence, why now? I gripped the phone, voice trembling slightly. Yes, this is Michael. What's wrong with him? They told me Kevin Bell had developed severe myelodysplastic syndrome, a life-threatening complication worsened by prison conditions and age. His prognosis was critical. The only realistic chance of survival was a bone marrow transplant, but no compatible donor had been found in the National Registry. We've searched the entire database. No HLA match with sufficient compatibility. Given the urgency, we're contacting all direct blood relatives for testing. I froze for a moment, then steadied myself. HLA compatibility, genetic matching. Direct blood relatives? But Dad had disowned me. The DNA test 2 years ago had proved I wasn't his son. I took a deep breath and said calmly, Kevin still has another son, Mac Bell, who's currently incarcerated. Why not contact him? Mac is the biological son, the heir. The woman paused, then replied, We already tested Mac Bell. The results show his HLA markers are not compatible enough for a safe transplant. Therefore, we have no choice but to reach out to you, Michael Bell, as the last remaining relative who might be a match. Can you come to the hospital for testing? This is an emergency. Her words hit me like lightning. My hand shook holding the phone, a chill ran down my spine. The studio suddenly felt suffocating. The afternoon light became blinding. Mac wasn't compatible? The son Dad had poured everything into, the one he chose over me, wasn't a match? I repeated, voice breaking. That's impossible. Mac is his real son. We only go by the test results, she said professionally. That's precisely why we're contacting you. In that moment, I realized everything was about to veer in a direction I never expected, shattering what I had believed for the past 2 years. This call was no coincidence. It was another bomb, ready to explode the past I had tried so hard to bury. My heart pounded. Suspense surged through me. The life I thought had finally settled was being turned upside down again. I whispered into the phone, Okay, I'll be there right away. But deep inside I knew. The real truth was waiting. That night I barely slept. I lay in bed, blanket pulled up to my chin, but sleep fled from me like an enemy. Thoughts piled on top of one another, drilling deeper into my mind. The image of Dad publicly disowning me at his retirement gala, his cold voice echoing in front of hundreds of guests. He is not my biological son. No blood relation. My father, Kevin Bell, once a man of iron, now lay weak, his life hanging on someone else's bone marrow. And that someone might be me. But why didn't Mac match? Mac, the one Dad had poured all his love, power, and legacy into. The DNA test 2 years ago had declared Mac the real son and me the outsider. What was happening now? Had Mom hidden something else? She had concealed Dad's crimes for decades. Could she also have hidden the truth about our origins? I tormented myself between suspicion and fear, endlessly wondering whether this was just a medical mistake or a horrifying secret buried for decades. Did Dad know? Or had he been deceived too? I kept thinking about that DNA report Mac had shoved at me the night after the gala. 6 months earlier, they had tested me behind my back. Result, 0% paternity with Kevin Bell. Yet now the HLA results told a different story. HLA, human leukocyte antigen, is a deeper genetic marker used for organ transplant compatibility. If Mac wasn't a match, what did that mean? Was the old DNA test faked? Was there infidelity, deception in the family? Fear flooded me. Fear that the truth would overturn everything I had accepted. Fear that I was about to face an even greater tragedy. Near dawn, exhausted from the chaos in my head, I decided I would go straight to the hospital and find out for myself. I had lain awake for hours, body drained, mind still spinning. When the first light crept through the curtains, I got up, made coffee, but my hands shook so badly I spilled half of it. I threw on my old jacket, slung the camera over my shoulder out of habit, like a shield, and drove to the hospital. Early morning Detroit was quiet. Night shift workers dragging their feet, bus exhaust mixing with fog. I parked in the hospital lot, the huge building's glass facade glinting weakly in the pale sun. Inside, the sharp smell of disinfectant hit me. The PA system called out patient names. I walked to the reception desk, voice firm. "I'm Michael Bell. I'm here for the HLA test for Kevin Bell." A nurse led me to a small waiting room. Sterile white walls, hard plastic chairs. I demanded to see Mac's HLA file first. "I need to confirm before I decide anything." They hesitated, but after checking paperwork, a middle-aged doctor, Dr. Harlan, entered with a thin folder. He adjusted his glasses and spoke gently. "This is Mac Bell's file. You have the right to see it because of the emergency." I opened it, heart hammering. The report stated clearly, Mac Bell has insufficient biological compatibility for marrow donation and is not confirmed as a direct blood relative of Kevin Bell based on stored genetic data. Black and white numbers showed HLA compatibility well below the required 50%. I read it over and over, feeling a gaping hole open in my chest. Not a direct blood relative? Mac, the heir Dad had given everything to, wasn't his son? Shock spread through me. I had to grip the table to stay upright. Dr. Harlan watched me. "The results are clear. Mac cannot donate." I stood frozen, the world turning upside down. If Mac wasn't the biological son, then the DNA test from 2 years ago was fake. Or had Dad been deceived? I whispered, "What about me, doctor?" He nodded. "We'll test you right now." They drew blood and ran an urgent analysis. A few hours later, the results were ready. I waited in the corridor, mind in turmoil, watching patients roll by in wheelchairs with IV poles. Dr. Harlan returned, holding the paper. "Your results show full compatibility for a marrow transplant to Kevin Bell. And the genetic analysis confirms that you, and only you, are his biological son." When the truth finally came out, I felt no comfort, only the bitter irony squeezing my heart. The son rejected his whole life was the one who carried his father's blood after all. I was the real son. Dad had used a fake test to get rid of me. Or had Mom hidden the truth about Mac? I stood there, the paper trembling in my hand, tears threatening. Dr. Harlan put a hand on my shoulder. "You are his only hope, but the decision is yours." I nodded, but my mind was numb. I hadn't decided yet whether to donate. I left the hospital in silence, walked to the parking lot under the harsh afternoon sun, carrying questions that gnawed relentlessly. Why? Why could a father publicly disown his own flesh and blood only to face death and need that same son's life to survive? Did he know the truth? Or was it all Mac's scheme? I drove home, the highway blurring through tears, feeling my life flip upside down once again. I needed time to understand how a father could reject his real son, then stand at death's door needing that son's marrow. Back at my little house, I collapsed onto the sofa and stared at the darkening backyard. Memories flooded in. The retirement gala, Dad's denial, Mac's laughter. Now what? If I was the real son, then who was Mac? Whose child was he? Did Mom know? She had hidden Dad's financial crimes. Had she also hidden an affair? Or had Dad been the one who betrayed her? I sat there for hours, mind in chaos, neither eating nor drinking. That night I came home in a daze, letting past and present collide inside me, still unable to make a final choice. I lay in bed staring at the dark ceiling, thoughts spinning. Donating marrow meant saving the man who had abandoned me. Refusing meant letting him die, and carrying that guilt forever. After another night of torment, when dawn crept in again, I finally drove to the hospital and signed the consent form for the transplant. I arrived exhausted, but the decision had solidified. It wasn't born of full forgiveness. I still hurt from the years of rejection, from the fake test, from everything. Nor had the resentment completely faded. The anger still smoldered. I did it for one reason I couldn't deny. No matter how much he had rejected me, Kevin Bell was still my biological father. His blood ran in my veins, no matter how fiercely he denied it. And above all, I did it because I refused to become the kind of person he had been to me. Cold, ruthless, willing to discard blood ties for power. I signed the papers, hand trembling slightly, but heart strangely calm. Dr. Harlan nodded. "You are a dutiful son." I walked out of the hospital into the autumn wind, carrying a strange feeling. Not joy, not regret, just the next step in a life full of paradoxes. The suspense has now turned into waiting. How will the transplant go? And what is the full truth about Mac? My life has changed once again. The day before the official marrow transplant, I returned to the hospital to complete the final preoperative procedures. Early morning Detroit was still wrapped in fog. I drove through empty streets while the radio announced chilly weather. The hospital greeted me with the familiar sting of disinfectant and the echoing PA calling patients' names down long corridors. I met Dr. Harlan in the clinic. He reviewed my blood work again, took my blood pressure, and explained the procedure. "You'll be under local anesthesia. We'll extract marrow from the pelvic bone. It's not very painful, but you'll need rest afterward." I nodded and signed a few more forms, though my mind was elsewhere. Inside me surged a mixture of curiosity and dread. I wanted to see my father, to ask him the truth. Did he even know? Or did he still believe the lie he himself had created? Once the paperwork was done, I walked out into the corridor, intending to go home and rest. But as I passed the intensive care unit, my feet stopped on their own. The area was quiet. Glass-walled isolation rooms, steady beeping of monitors. I paused in front of the room Dr. Harlan had once casually mentioned, Kevin's room. Through the glass, the man who once stood at the peak of power was now just a frail body sustained by machines and medicine. My father, Kevin Bell, lay there. Skin ashen, hair thinned and snow-white, eyes closed beneath the oxygen mask. He had wasted away. The sharp, authoritarian features that once terrified me were now only deep wrinkles on an exhausted face. The heart monitor beeped steadily. IVs dripped rhythmically, and the room was heavy with the smell of medication. For the first time in my life, I saw my father completely helpless. No more powerful suits, no more commanding voice, no more contemptuous stares. Just a weak old man fighting death. My chest tightened, not with instant pity, but with a strange pain, as if I were looking at my own reflection in a shattered mirror. He had once been the father I desperately wanted recognition from, then the enemy I had to face. Now he was simply a human being about to leave this world. I hesitated, then tapped lightly on the glass. A passing nurse recognized me from the files and nodded. "You can visit briefly. 5 minutes only." She helped me into an isolation gown and mask, then opened the door. I stepped inside. The machine sounded louder, the cold air bit through my skin. I stood by the bed in heavy silence. Slowly, Kevin opened his eyes, clouded by drugs, but then he recognized me. His face changed, from exhaustion to confusion, bewilderment, and a fear I had never seen in him before. He tried to sit up, but his frail body barely moved. I gripped the bed rail, voice calm though my heart stormed. "I've come to finish the paperwork. I'm going to donate the marrow." He stared, eyes wide, as if he couldn't believe it. Then he whispered, voice trembling, You're the match. What about Mac?" I nodded. He fell silent, staring at the frosted window. Then he began to speak, weakly but filled with emotion. Kevin said that until this very moment he had truly believed Mac was his biological son, and that belief had made him cruel enough to publicly disown me at the retirement gala. "I always thought Mac was mine. That DNA test, Mac showed it to me. He said you weren't, and I believed him. But now you're the one saving my life?" He coughed. The monitors beeped faster. A nurse glanced anxiously through the glass. I stood still, listening, heart pounding. He continued, voice breaking, "I admit, I never double-checked the truth. I never doubted the choice I had bet my whole life on. Mac was like me, ambitious, tough. You were like your mother, sensitive, dreamy. I thought you were the mistake. Yet I, the son he had publicly rejected, was now the only one who could save him." He looked at me, eyes glistening. "And now, Mac isn't a match. And are you really my son?" "I was wrong, Michael." In his broken state, Kevin confessed that at the retirement gala. His public disownment of me had come from an obsession with power and a succession plan already fixed on Mac. That night, I was possessed by power. I wanted Mac to inherit everything, wanted the company clean, free of you, the one who didn't fit. I used that DNA report as an excuse. I put power, reputation, and ambition above fatherhood. He paused, breathing hard. The oxygen hissed. Only when facing death did I have to look straight at the irreversible consequences. I'm dying, and now I see. I've lost everything. He admitted that for years he had convinced himself Mac was the future and I was the burden. I told myself Mac was the future and you were dead weight. I gave him everything, money, opportunities, love. And I pushed you away. He coughed again, voice fading. I never imagined that choice would lead to the cruelest irony, pouring my whole life into someone who isn't my blood and abandoning my real son. His words cut into me like knives. This collapse was no longer that of a corporate titan. The company had crumbled long ago, but the total collapse of a father. He cried, tears rolling down his wrinkled cheeks, and I saw him. Not the powerful Kevin Bell, but a regretful old man powerless before fate. I listened in silence. No triumph, no release. His confessions didn't erase the years of rejection, the lonely summers, the contempt, the forged test that plunged me into darkness. But they finally gave an answer to the paradox of my life. He had chosen power over fatherhood, and now he was paying with his life. Mac, the one who wasn't his son, was the product of that blindness. I stood there, emotions tangled, anger, pity, and a faint relief. The nurse tapped the glass. Time was up. Before I turned to leave, Kevin whispered a thank you, voice barely audible. Thank you, son. I didn't reply. I wasn't donating for gratitude. I was doing it for my own conscience. I hadn't fully forgiven him. The wounds were too deep, but I chose not to become him. I walked out. The door closed behind me with a soft click. As the ICU door shut, I understood this meeting wasn't about reconciliation. Nothing could heal that much damage. but about finally closing once and for all a family tragedy built on prejudice, ambition, and the blindness of power. I stepped into the corridor. A draft from the window carried the smell of medicine. The suspense has turned into acceptance. The transplant is coming, and whatever the outcome, I am free. The marrow transplant took place as scheduled on a foggy Detroit morning. I arrived at the hospital early, put on the isolation gown, and lay on the operating table with my heart pounding. Local anesthesia was administered, and I felt sharp stings in my pelvis as they harvested the marrow. A procedure that lasted several hours, but I gritted my teeth and endured. Not because I felt heroic, but because this was my choice. I rested in recovery, body exhausted, yet my mind strangely clear. A few days later, Kevin's vital signs began to stabilize. Heart rate steadied, blood oxygen rose, and the doctors confirmed the transplant was a success. Dr. Harlan told me, "He's out of critical condition. Your marrow was a perfect match, no complications." I exhaled in relief but felt no joy. Just one burden lifted, only to be replaced by others. Kevin survived the crisis, but his health had collapsed irreversibly. He was visibly emaciated, skin pallid, and needed crutches to move during his final days in the hospital. I did not visit him again. There was no need after that last conversation. Once stable, he was transferred back to prison to serve the remainder of his sentence. From a once mighty tycoon who ruled Bell Industrial Group with an iron fist and commanded Detroit's business world, he had become a frail, aging prisoner whose life now depended on the very son he had disowned. Every beat of his heart was sustained by my marrow, the blood he had once denied. Kevin Bell's life had entered a long phase of reckoning. No more power, no more prestige, only daily confrontation with regret. Through scattered updates from Attorney Martin, I learned he sat in his cell staring at the bars, thinking about the choices that had destroyed everything. No company left to run, no Mac left to be proud of. Just loneliness and illness. I felt neither pity nor satisfaction. It was simply the inevitable end to a tragedy of his own making. After recovering from the donation, weeks of fatigue and aching hips, I decided to visit Mac in prison one last time to put everything to rest. It was time to face the man who had falsified the truth and plunged me into darkness for 2 years. I drove to the prison on the outskirts, a gray complex with high walls and razor wire, heavy with the smell of damp and the clanging of locks. In the visiting room, we sat across from each other, separated by glass. Mac had lost a lot of weight. His face was gaunt, dark circles under his eyes, hair cropped short and unkempt, the prison uniform hanging loosely on what had once been a strong frame. The arrogance and contempt were gone from his gaze, replaced by exhaustion, confusion, and a trace of fear when he looked at me. We picked up the phones. His voice was hoarse through the speaker. "Michael, why are you here, after everything?" I looked straight into his eyes, calm. "To end it. To ask about that DNA test. And why you weren't a match for Dad." Mac lowered his head, silent for a long time, then confessed with a choked voice that he had secretly swapped the DNA samples years ago, terrified of losing his place as heir and haunted by the fear that I might surpass him. Dad always saw you as the failure, but I was scared. I paid a private lab to fake the results. I showed Dad the forged report and convinced him you weren't his son. I did it to secure my position, to make sure everything went to me." His words cut like a blade. So it had all been a lie, just to eliminate me. He continued, "The fake report became the basis for Kevin's public disownment at the retirement gala and the complete stripping of my inheritance. That night, I pushed Dad to do it, to make it final so you could never come back. I thought I'd won, but now I've lost everything." In the total collapse of his beliefs and values, Mac bowed his head and apologized for destroying my life just to cling to a false identity. He cried, voice breaking through the receiver, "I'm sorry, Michael. I ruined you, pushed you out of the family, made you live a lie. I'm not his real son. I was terrified of losing everything, so I did this. Now I'm here, paying for my mistakes." I sat watching him cry but felt no vindictive pleasure, no thrill of victory. Instead, I realized we had both been damaged children in different ways. I was rejected for not fitting Dad's ambitions. Mac lived in fear of losing what he had and clung to it with lies. We were both victims of a family rotten from the inside. Before leaving, I offered neither forgiveness nor condemnation. I simply nodded coldly, hung up the phone, and walked away. From that moment, our relationship ended in silence. Nothing left to say, nothing left to salvage. I stepped out of the prison, cold wind whipped my face. It felt like a chapter had finally closed. The next day, I drove to the cemetery where Mom rests. The familiar road through Detroit's suburbs, lined with autumn gold trees, led me to the quiet hillside graveyard. I parked, picked up a bouquet of white daisies, her favorite, and walked to her grave. In front of Abigail's headstone, I stood for a long time in silence, the wind whispering through the rows of stones, carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. The stone bore her name and dates with the simple inscription, "Beloved Mother." I knelt, laid the flowers, and began to speak, whispering as if she were there. I told her about the transplant, about Dad surviving to face the consequences of his choices, about the truth that Mac was not his son, a truth she had hidden her whole life. "Mom, I saved him. My marrow matched, and the tests proved I'm the real son. But Mac, he isn't. You knew, didn't you? You stayed silent to protect everyone, but why didn't you ever tell me?" My voice broke. Tears rolled down my cheeks. I sat there for hours telling her about the years since she left, the trial, the prison sentences, and now this final irony. I was grateful for her love and protection, yet for the first time I also faced the painful truth that her silence had helped prolong the tragedy. She had loved us so much she endured everything. Hiding Dad's crimes, hiding Mac's origins, burying every secret to keep the family intact. But that silence had fed the lies, kept me in darkness, and driven Mac to deception. Two opposing feelings lived inside me at once. Deep compassion for a woman who spent her life in fear inside a cold house with a domineering husband, sacrificing everything for her children, and the ache of realizing I too had been a victim of the very secrets she chose to keep. If she had spoken sooner, perhaps everything would have been different. I cried, not from anger or blame, but from sorrow. There was no rage, no resentment left. What remained was a clear-eyed forgiveness, neither idealized nor illusory. I forgave her because she was my mother, the only person who had truly loved me, but I would never repeat her mistake. No more silence in the face of lies. Before leaving the cemetery, I stood, wiped my tears, and looked at her stone one last time. I understood. The Bell family had officially ended right here, between Mom's death and Dad's downfall. No more Bell Industrial, no more legacy of power, no more layers of secrets. The rest of my life no longer belongs to secrets, power, or hatred. It belongs to a different choice, to live openly and freely. I drove home with the windows down, autumn wind rushing in, carrying the first feeling of lightness I'd known in years. The suspense, the drama, it's over. Now it's time to truly live. After all the storms had passed, I returned to my simple life in the little house on the outskirts of Detroit. That house, with its green backyard and a garage just big enough for my old car, had truly become a refuge after the tempest. I tidied up the photography studio, rearranged the old prints on the shelves, and started over with small, steady jobs. Life slipped back into its familiar rhythm. Waking early to brew strong black coffee, grabbing the camera and wandering the familiar streets, photographing ordinary faces, tired workers leaving their shifts, children playing in the autumn sun or the weathered corners of old factories I had known since childhood. The studio ran steadily. I never became fabulously wealthy, but I earned enough to live by my own skill and passion. Weddings, community events, art series for local galleries. The income wasn't lavish like the money Mom had left me, which I still invested cautiously, but it was honest, made with my own hands. Every sold print was a small joy, a reminder that I was living the life I had chosen, no longer bound by my father's legacy or the secrets of the past. A few years later, once the studio began turning a steady profit, I used part of it to set up a modest scholarship fund for children from difficult backgrounds, especially those who had been abandoned or lived in violent homes. The fund was small, enough to help only a handful of kids each year. Tuition, books, sometimes counseling sessions. I never put my name on it publicly and never sought media attention. No spotlight, no praise needed. I quietly kept it going as a way to give back the light I myself had once lacked. Every time I transferred money to a child whose parents had walked away, I thought of the little boy I once was, wandering the backyard with a camera, aching for a word of approval from his father. The fund became my way of healing, a silent promise that my tragedy would not be repeated in another life. During a community photography project, a series on struggling families in Detroit meant to raise awareness about domestic violence, I met Sophia. It was a drizzly afternoon at the local social services center. Sophia Bell, an ironic coincidence of surnames, nothing more, was a social worker with her hair tied back neatly and a warm, steady smile. She was a few years older than me, counseling a single mother with quiet empathy in her eyes. Two strangers connected by shared understanding and scars that had already begun to heal. I photographed her from a distance, not for publication but because of the genuine beauty in the way she listened. After the shoot, we talked. At first about the project, about the children who needed help. Then slowly personal stories slipped in. She spoke of a childhood marked by an alcoholic father and a mother who endured in silence. I shared fragments of my own journey, not everything, but enough for her to understand. No drama, no rush. We built something on quiet recognition rather than glamour or painful pasts. Coffee at small cafes, walks around the lake, long conversations about life. She never pressed about the trial or my father. She knew from the news but chose not to dig. Instead, we spoke of the future, of how wounds heal. We married not long after, a simple wedding, no media, no ostentatious guests. It was an autumn afternoon in the backyard of the little house, just a few close friends from the studio and the center. We exchanged rings beneath a blazing red maple, vows short and plain. Life with her was made of ordinary moments, cooking dinner together, watching old movies, planning the next round of scholarships. She brought patience and optimism where I lacked them. I gave her the calm she craved after exhausting days with traumatized children. When Oliver Bell, our first child, was born, I finally understood in the clearest way what it truly means to be a father. It was a spring morning in the local hospital when the nurse placed the tiny bundle in my arms. Oliver, pink, eyes squeezed shut, crying with all his might. I held him with a mixture of overwhelming joy and fear because no one understood better than I did how heavy the word family can be. Joy because this was my family, real, not built on power or secrets. Fear because I remembered my own father and every mistake he made. Favoritism, rejection, silence. Sophia lay beside me, exhausted but smiling. From then on, life revolved around the boy. Sleepless nights changing diapers, mornings playing in the yard, the endless photographs I took. First smile, first steps. Oliver grew up surrounded by steady, equal love. No comparisons, no favoritism. I taught him photography. Sophia taught him kindness. Our family was small but solid, not an empire but a true home. Looking back on the whole journey, I realized this. Truth, no matter how brutal, is the only path to real freedom. I lived inside lies, disowned because of a forged test, carrying my mother's hidden secrets, and only when I spoke them aloud, only when I faced them, did I become free. Power can build empires, but it can also destroy a family. My father proved that. He built Bell Industrial on ambition and lost everything because of it. Silence in the face of wrong is never neutral. It is complicity that prolongs tragedy. My mother stayed silent, and the tragedy lasted her whole life and spilled onto us. I learned that courage is not only denouncing others' crimes, It is also daring to face the truth of your own family, of the very blood you come from. I did that. Faced the test, Mac's confession, my father's regret, and from that I changed. From my own tragedy, I chose to live more slowly, more kindly, more awake. I never sought to be a hero in society's eyes. No interviews, no memoir. I simply chose to be a man who does not turn away from truth and refuses to repeat the mistakes of the previous generation. With Oliver, I show no favoritism and stay silent about no wrong, however small. With Sophia, I hide nothing. The studio still runs, the scholarship fund has quietly grown, now helping dozens of children each year. And life is made of ordinary moments. Taking my son to the park, photographing sunsets with my wife, or sitting alone reflecting on the past. The rest of my days will no longer be written in secrets and resentment. They will be written in quiet work, simple moments, and the freedom I had to trade nearly a lifetime to earn. I grow older, silver threading my hair, but my heart is light, no longer carrying the weight of the old Bell family. And that is the final message I keep for myself. We cannot choose where we are born, but we always have the right to choose how we live and how we walk out of the shadows of the past. I made my choice, and now watching Oliver grow, I know it was the right one. My story ends not in tragedy, but in peace.